Chapter 34. Sophia Russo may require further persuasion. Re the Valentine case. J. Kana to unnamed contact via email. Frustrated, choked up with a rage that had nowhere to go, Max made a cup of coffee and tried to lose himself in work. Sophia had updated him on everything she'd discovered during the time he'd been tied up in the wrenching aftermath of the discovery of Gwen Haley's body, but now he began to read her notes in depth. She had one hell of a brain, he thought. The information was not only neatly bullet-pointed and outlined, but cross-referenced in a way that told him she had an innate understanding of how his own mind worked. Near the end of the file, he came across something that made him frown. Knowing he needed Sophia to explain the relevance of the information in a psi context, he began to get up, when he caught the blinking time code on the comm panel. 1 a.m. His gaze went to the wall that separated his apartment from Sophia's, and he couldn't help but remember the softness of her skin, the way her pulse had rocketed under his touch, the delicate, enticing scent of her. His body, having finally stopped riding the steel edge of need, grew hard, heavy once more. Sucking in a breath through clenched teeth, he threw down his pen and got up, intending to take a cold shower when something stopped him. A noise. Angling his head, he listened again. A soft thump. Once. Just once. But he'd heard. Sophie. He grabbed his stunner and walked quietly to the door. Activating the outside cameras, he checked that the space immediately outside his door was clear before exiting, with a vigilance all cops learned on their first day on the job. The corridor proved empty, the lighting muted to night levels. Stepping to Sophia's apartment, he scanned himself in using his palm print, his access courtesy of Sophia herself. Worried that she'd had a blackout as a result of the previous day's events, but forcing himself to move with caution in case of an intruder, he made his way through the unlighted living area and to her bedroom. The bed held only rumpled sheets and an organizer with a bright, glowing screen. She'd been awake too, he thought. Whatever had happened, it hadn't taken her unawares. Fur across his foot. Morpheus. Following the cat's night-glow gaze, he felt his toes nudge something on the floor. He froze, bent down. The feel of cotton covering warm skin. No. Continuing to hold his stunner at the ready, even as he checked Sophia's pulse, he said, "Lights, night mode." The lights came on a dim setting, making the transition from dark to light much easier. No one jumped out, the shadows hiding nothing malignant. He looked over the bathroom quickly just in case. Nothing. Whatever had happened, it had happened in Sophia's mind. Returning, he bent down to check her for injuries, found no cuts, no abrasions. But when he lifted her eyelids, it was to see her eyes swallowed by black. "Sophie," he said again, his tone firm though an anguished rage tore through him, driven by a part of him that didn't understand logic, only a powerful visceral need for her voice. No response. Sliding his arms beneath her body, he lifted her up and took her to the bed, pulling a comforter over her before his hand went to the pocket of his jeans, where he'd left his cell. Pressing in a familiar code, he said, "I need Psy help." But the Psy who turned up a bare 10 minutes later with a tall amber blonde male wasn't anyone he'd expected. He recognized her, of course. That distinctive red hair, those cardinal eyes. Faith Nightstar was said to be the strongest Psy in or out of the net, her ability to see the future a gift and a curse both. But Max knew he'd always see it as a gift after the way she'd saved their lives. "Thanks for coming." As Faith hurried past and unerringly to the bedroom, Max paused long enough to say, "You got here quick." "Faith," the changeling male said, "woke me up an hour ago and told me we'd be needed in the city around now." Max, walking back to the bedroom, stopped for an instant. "I guess I never thought about the reality of being mated to an Psy." Vaughn slapped him on the back. "Ask me sometime about how fucking difficult it is to surprise her with a gift." It was said with affection, his tone that of a man who wasn't only delighted in his mate, but didn't care if the whole world knew about it. They entered the bedroom at that moment, and everything else faded. Faith was sitting beside Sophia's stiff form, her hand on his J's forehead. "Her telepathic shields are terrifyingly thin, but they are continuing to protect her," Faith said, before pausing for almost 10 seconds. "Her Psynet shields appear fine. A little unusual according to my contact, but not damaged." Max didn't ask about Faith's contact, taking it as a given that that contact would soon be dead if it became known he or she was sharing information outside the net. "Do we need to get her to a hospital?" The Foreseer's endless eyes met his. "No. She'll wake up soon." A simple, absolute answer, and yet. "What aren't you telling me?" "There'll be time after she wakes." Faith looked up at her mate as he came to stand beside her, his fingers playing through her hair. "Coffee?" she asked. Vaughn's smile was indulgent. "Addict. Your fault." The Foreseer's expression was somber, belying her light words. We'll need to talk once she wakes. Smile fading into an expression of intense tenderness, Vaughn untangled his fingers from his mate's hair and went to exit the room. Come on, Max. You can't do anything here. I'll stay. No way in hell was he leaving his Sophie alone. Faith seemed to struggle with something as she rose to her feet, but in the end, she followed Vaughn out in silence. Faith walked straight to where Vaughn was measuring out coffee grounds. Hey! Putting an arm around her, he hugged her to the solid strength of his side. The answer's no. She rubbed her face against his chest as he turned to embrace her fully, loving the scent of him. How did you know what I was going to ask? We have been mated over a year. Give the cat a little credit. A teasing kiss from her jaguar, his hand curving around her throat in gentle possession. You said it yourself, Faith. A quiet reminder, the jaguar looking out of his eyes. The future isn't fixed. It wasn't for Dorian. Yes. She'd seen the Sentinel's future blacked out, had thought it meant death, but he'd survived. It's different this time, Vaughn. How? I saw bits and pieces of reality, the fact that Sophia would need us for some reason tonight, other events that may or may not happen, but I felt this gathering wave. I can't describe it, but I know something huge is about to happen, and it's centered around Sophia Russo. You're talking about more than the life of one person. Two people, he added, and she knew he'd seen the way Max looked at Sophia. So had she. Her Foreseer's heart hurt for them, for the future they didn't have. I've never felt anything like this, but from the research I've been doing, using the records her father had managed to unearth and smuggle out to her, FSI in the past noted the same kinds of sensations before major catastrophic events. Vaughn cupped her face, an aureola of pure gold around his irises, the jaguar rising to the surface. Are you talking earthquake, plague, political turmoil? All, she whispered. But whatever it is, Sophia Russo is the domino that will begin an unstoppable cascade. The J was the leading edge of a perfect storm, one that might annihilate them all. Max. It's as if he simply doesn't exist in Sophia's future, Faith said, tugging at the tie that held back her mate's hair. It fell over her hands in a stroke of rough silk, a familiar anchor. But I don't get that same sense of blankness as I did with Dorian. Instead, it's this feeling that he's never been a part of her life. Which is impossible. Vaughn stilled. Not if the Sophia you see is Sophia after rehabilitation. Faith shook her head in stunned horror, but he was right. Full rehabilitation wiped out the psyche, creating a slate so blank that nothing of the mind, the soul, remained. Max argued with himself about whether or not to touch Sophia, knowing it had to have been their sexual play that had caused this, but driven by gut instinct, he got on the bed and cradled her in his lap, and the instant he did, it felt right. She was a soft, warm weight on him, her breathing easy, her heartbeat steady. Something wild and panicked inside him settled. She hadn't left him, this Jay who'd become the fulcrum of his universe, a quiet sound, so quiet he hardly heard it. Shifting his hold, he pushed midnight strands of hair off her face, keeping his hand on her cheek. Sophie. A hitched breath, eyes fluttering open. They remained drowned in black, endless and mysterious. A gasp, her hand flying up to close over his. His soul went cold. Driven by primal need, had he made a fatal error? If he had, the shock would plunge her back into unconsciousness. Or worse. But before he could break contact, she gripped his hand tight, so tight. And as he watched, the liquid black began to recede from her eyes, until finally, only the violet of her iris, the normal black of her pupil was visible. Max. He tried to catch her gaze, but it kept shifting. Focus, Sophie. Focus. Her disorientation worried him, could well be a signal of some kind of brain damage. All at once her eyes locked to his. Name's not Sophie. No? What is it? The most minute of pauses. Sophia Russo. It almost sounded like relief. Sophia Russo, she repeated. Gradient 8.85 Psi, employed by the Justice Corps, temporarily attached to the office of Counselor Nikita Duncan. Good. Relief washed through him as well. And who am I? Max Shannon, enforcement detective, highest clearance rate in New York, natural mental shield, and hands that touch me. Her own hand spasmed around his, as if she'd only just become aware of how hard she'd been holding on. Shua. Taking that hand in his, he pressed a kiss to her palm. You're okay. His heart shuddered, though he fought to keep his voice calm. Max, you can call me Sophie, she said in a quickness of words, as if afraid he'd take her earlier statement the wrong way. I planned to do it for a long time. He'd lost everything else and survived, but he couldn't lose her, not his Jay. It would break him. Intertwining her fingers with his, she turned her head a little. Someone else is here. I can hear sounds. Faith Nightstar and her mate, Vaughn D'Angelo. Faith Foreseer. She dropped her gaze to their hands. What happened? Faith and Vaughn walked back in at that moment, with 4 mugs of coffee in hand. We were hoping you could tell us, Faith said, placing 2 of the mugs on the bedside table. Sophia looked up but didn't move off Max's lap, which told him more about her condition than anything else. Because his Sophie had a quiet reserve about her in public, or when they were around others, one that he'd come to realize was part of her nature, not a product of silence. She'd never be comfortable with open displays of emotion, but that was fine with Max because with him she lowered her guard, gave him her trust. Breaking their hand clasp, he picked up one of the mugs and urged it into her hands. Drink. She took an obedient sip, her eyes not on Faith but on Vaughn. Max felt a sharp tug of irritation. He recalled hearing that Vaughn wasn't a leopard but the male was a cat of some kind. He had the same feline grace that Max had seen in Lucas in Dorian. And Max had been in the world long enough to know that women were drawn to the cat changelings. Sophia's eyes didn't move off Vaughn even when the cat stretched out his arm on the sofa behind Faith's head, curving his hand around his mate's nape in a blatant display and statement of his loyalty. It was Faith who broke the odd silence. If you don't stop looking at my mate that way, I might have to unsheath my claws. Her smile took any sting out of what was clearly a tease. But Sophia didn't laugh. Keeping her eyes on Vaughn, she spoke to Faith. He's not safe, you know. He could snap your neck with a single move. You should shift away from him. Delighted at the reason she'd been staring, Max fought not to laugh. But the look of affront on Vaughn's face was priceless. Burying his own face in Sophia's hair to muffle his laugh, he tugged her a little closer, just in case the changeling was annoyed enough to snarl at her. But Faith put a hand on her mate's thigh, and cardinal eyes gleaming with laughter, nodded at Sophia. I wouldn't throw stones. Look where you're sitting. Sophia belatedly seemed to realize her position. Color tinged her cheeks but she didn't move. That's my girl. Running a hand over her hair, Max asked her if she knew the reason she'd fallen unconscious. Yes. She cuddled impossibly closer to him. An attempted hack into my brain. Chapter 35. Max sucked in a breath but it was Faith who next spoke. That should be impossible. I know some F-designation men and women who see only the past, and they work for justice. Their shields are impenetrable. I assume JS are the same. Yes, we are, Sophia said, giving him the coffee so he could place it on the nightstand. But the attempt was intense enough to cause near unbearable pressure on my brain. Her body trembled just a little, but Max felt it. Placing her on the bed with all the tenderness he had in him, he swung his legs over the side and said, we can discuss this more later. Right now Sophia needs to get some rest. Yes, of course. Faith stood up at once. Vaughn followed a little more slowly. Walking them to the door, Max was ready for the Dark River Sentinel's final words. She's still hooked into the net. Max means she can't be trusted. He felt his hand clench on the door. So was Faith when you met her if I'm right. Not the same situation and you know it. The changeling didn't sound angry. If anything there was a gut-deep understanding in his tone. Faith was watched but in an isolated setting. Sophia is in the middle of the Justice Corps. There are all kinds of eyes on her. And though the Sentinel didn't say it, Max knew the implications. Sophia might already have something in her head. Something that had penetrated her shields without her knowledge. Having changed into a loose t-shirt to sleep in, Sophia returned from the bathroom to find Max waiting by the bed. He looked strong and beautiful. And remote, the stunner he held loosely by his side a stark reminder of who he was, what he did. Stay with me. It came out without thought, the heat of his body still imprinted on her skin. I think I can handle the sensations now. The invitation took all the courage she had. She bit her lip to quiet the plea that wanted to escape. She didn't want him to pity her. But oh how she needed him didn't know words but he placed the stunner on the bedside table and ripped off his t-shirt. She clenched her hands on the bottom of her own. Angling his head, he tugged down the comforter and waited for her to get in. As he went to follow, his jeans still on, she had a thought. Max, what if I'm compromised in some way? You shouldn't leave a weapon that accessible to me. Safety's on, release program to my active thumbprint, he said, pulling the comforter over them. And no offense, Sophie, sweetheart, but you'd make a very bad assassin. I could blow out your mind, she reminded him. Not easily, he answered. According to what I've picked up over the years, a natural shield means I'd have enough of a warning to go for my weapon, or considering the fact that you're a little bit of nothing, knock you out cold. The words made him scowl. Good. Relieved, in spite of the fact that she could see he hated the idea of hurting her, she let him slide an arm under her head, the other going around her waist. That much sensation, that much contact, still burned a hot, wild flame across her skin, but she thought, becoming used to it. With Max it wasn't an intrusion but a choice on her part. Turning, she placed her hands flat on his chest. Heat. A sudden fever. Almost pain. But no voices in my head, she whispered. No memories, no thoughts, no yesterdays but my own. Max squeezed her gently, and she knew he understood. Don't push it, he said. Small bites, remember? She didn't listen, lost in the storm of sensation, the world a kaleidoscope around her. We never finished. Max's hand stopped its soothing strokes over her back. You're not exactly in any shape. Tilting her head, she kissed the line of his neck, taking the taste of him into her lungs. Sophie. Then his hand was on her cheek and she was being turned onto her back, and he was kissing the breath out of her. The kaleidoscope spun and spun until it exploded. As the pieces rained around her, she found herself gripping Max's shoulders in an attempt to hold on. His muscles shifted beneath her palms, liquid and powerful. Instead of trying to control the amount of sensory input, she gave in, drowning in the wild heat of him, the delicious pressure of his lips, the way his thumb pressed down on her jaw to open her mouth to him. Max felt the instant Sophia let go. Her entire body melted for him, every inch of her open in invitation. It was the most luscious of temptations, but he wasn't about to take advantage of her when she'd been disoriented and lost only minutes ago. Breaking the kiss, he looked into eyes that had gone pure black again, but he could distinguish a difference, though he'd have been hard-pressed to describe it. He just knew this time it wasn't a marker of danger. Do all Psy eyes do that? An intimate murmur against her lips, his legs tangled with hers, his hand in her hair. Her fingers stroked over his shoulders with quick, hungry movements, and he was male enough to adore her for being so very delighted with him. It's more apparent at the higher end of the spectrum, but I think I may be even more susceptible to it, given the nature of my mind. Calm words, but her eyes, her body told a different story. He could almost feel the vibrating tension in her. Every tendon held taut. I know who you are, he said, holding her gaze. I'm not going to be scared away because of your imperfections. A sheen of wet in her eyes, turning the midnight iridescent. We fit, you and I, he whispered, looking into that haunting gaze. Two broken pieces making a whole. It wasn't the most romantic of statements, but it was torn from his soul. I am not losing you. She tugged him down, kissing him until his body hummed for her, until her breath came in choppy gasps. He broke the kiss. Is this much contact causing you pain? A pause. No. Swearing, he rolled off to sit on the edge of the bed, looking back at her over his shoulder. Why the hell did you? I wasn't lying, Max. Curling onto her side, she watched him with an intense interest that told him he was the absolute and utter focus of her world. Some men would have been scared away. Max knew he watched her the same way. Her chest rose as she took a long, shuddering breath. I don't know how to describe these sensations. The closest word is pain, but I know that's not right. I don't crave pain. And yet I crave what happens when you touch me. Max twisted so he could face her, one hand braced palm down beside her leg. It sounds like your nerves are raw, overloaded. Maybe. Clear words, a steel will. But I don't want to slow down. He had a will as strong. No more touching. I will not hurt you. Her shoulders slumped. Sensing his advantage, he pushed. Why did someone try to hack your mind tonight? Probably because they wanted to contaminate the evidence I'm due to give in a high-profile murder case, she said, her eyes not meeting his. Shame, he thought. That's what he read in her expression. Sophie. I'll tell you. Just give me a little more time? So vulnerable, her emotions stripped bare. Please, Max. He blew out a breath. I'm starting to think you're using the world please to get around me. A startled flicker of light in her eyes. No, I'm not. But could I? He felt his chest shake with unbidden, unexpected laughter. Do you think I'm going to answer that? That means I can. She sounded astonished and delighted in equal measures. I promise to use my powers for good. Reaching over, he slapped her lightly on the bottom through the comforter. You have the makings of a brat in you. A slow, so slow smile. His Sophie beginning to wake from a decades-long sleep. I need to tell you something about the Nikita investigation that I forgot to mention earlier. He kept his hand on her hip, enjoying the warm curves of her even if he couldn't touch skin. I meant to ask you something too. About Ryan. That's who I wanted to discuss, she interrupted. Specifically, the reason for his reconditioning 6 months ago. Max frowned. The file's sealed. He'd already tried to access it tonight. I called in a favor from another J. Pushing up into a sitting position, she shivered when he slid his hand over to her thigh. Ryan killed someone, but it was an accident. His telekinetic powers went out of control. Stroking her through the comforter once more, Max got up to walk to the window and back. How much would the reconditioning have messed with his head? No way to know. The process is intense, but it leaves the mind intact. That's the whole purpose, to eliminate fractures so the individual can function. Her words held the knowledge of experience. It would make sense that he'd be sympathetic to pure psi if his own abilities are spiraling out of control. But, Max folded his arms, leaning back on the wall beside the window, we come back to the fact that he wasn't working for Nikita at the time of the elevator sabotage. 1 mole I can accept. 2? No. Not in Nikita's organization. He's still the best lead we've got. Max straightened. And he won't be going anywhere tonight. I'll call, make sure security has him in their sights. We can talk to him tomorrow. She knew he was going to leave. Sliding down under the comforter, she turned her back to him. She'd accepted his will, but that didn't mean she had to like it. Sophie. She thumped her pillow into shape. A low blue word, then the bed dipped. I can't stay tonight, baby. His hand on her hip, a blaze of heat even through the comforter. He'd promised to fight for her. Well, she was going to fight for him too. We don't have to be skin to skin. She turned to face him, keeping her hands to herself. You can sleep on top of the comforter. Then she gave a small smile. Please. You've definitely got the makings of a brat. But Max stayed, sleeping beside his J for the hours till dawn. The dream came just before he woke. A dream in which River ran laughing behind him as they chased a stray dog they'd made into a pet. He opened his eyes to find his throat thick with tears, his heart a swelling ache in his chest. And he knew he'd dreamed the joy because of the woman who woke a moment later. Thank you, he said. Sleepy eyes, dark curls falling across one cheek. For what? For making me remember. He'd buried his past because it hurt too fucking much. But in doing so, he'd buried River. I think, he said, you would have adored River. He could have taught you every trick in the book on how to be a true brat. Then as they rose, dressed, and ate, he told her about the brother who'd left a mile-wide scar on his heart. Sophia halted Max when he would have gotten out of the car at the Duncan building. I want to tell you about the reason for the hack. She couldn't hide anymore. Not after the raw honesty of the memories he'd shared, of the family he'd shared. Her heart was so full it was hard to breathe, hard to speak. Whatever it is, Max said, his hand along the back of her seat. You know it doesn't matter. Not between us. I can alter memories. She made no effort to dress it up. I know. She jerked up her head. What? I'm a cop, Sophie. A wry reminder. I hadn't been in the job 2 years before I realized what JS could do. Then why don't you hate us? I always figured you had no choice in the matter. And I did my job. I got the evidence. Not every major case is won or lost on the evidence of a J. She should have ended it then, but now that she'd begun, she couldn't stop. She would not steal his affection, his loyalty through fraud. It would violate the trust between them, taint everything they had. So though the terror of rejection was a chill hand around her throat, she smoothed her flawlessly straight skirt down her legs and said, Do you remember Dr. Henley? The famous geneticist had killed his pregnant wife in cold blood. Then sliced her up into neat little pieces and dumped those pieces in the sea when he'd gone out for a Sunday fishing trip. There was even speculation that he'd used some pieces as bait. Not a case I could ever forget. The council planned to transfer him to a psi facility where he could continue his groundbreaking work. The callous murder of an innocent woman and her unborn child had been considered a mere inconvenience. All the JS knew. Pity then, Max said in a hard voice, that he had a sudden violent embolism that stopped his heart on his first day in prison, died before the medics could get to him. Sophia sucked in a breath. She guessed he understood what JS were capable of, had wanted to drive home the point so that there would be absolute honesty between them, but from the way he spoke. Have you always known? Cops call it the J penalty. A grim look. You weren't in the vicinity. I've seen your record. You weren't anywhere near Henley's prison when he died. No then, not me. Not that time. He slid back his door. Come on. She got out to walk beside him, her heart a tight, hopeful knot. I know you've accepted me, and that remained a deep source of wonder, but I still thought you'd be more hard-assed. A snort. I've seen rich men skate off rape charges, politicians bury abuse claims, young girls commit suicide after being hurt. I don't agree with vigilante justice, but JS aren't exactly vigilantes, are they? They know the exact nature of a particular crime, and they tend to give out punishments perfectly calibrated to that crime, and only in cases where justice would otherwise be defiled. We aren't judge and jury. She'd never talked openly about this. Even among JS it wasn't ever actually discussed. But they all knew the parameters, understood what the Corps would overlook as the cost of having JS in the system. We're the last resort when the tools of justice fail the victims. What? Max said, coming to a stop in front of the elevators, his body angled to hide her from the surveillance cameras, is the impact on a J who acts as that last resort, as an executioner if necessary. Every action has an opposite and equal reaction, she said, quoting the well-known law of physics. That maxim holds true on the psychic plane. White lines bracketed Max's mouth. So a J would be damaged by the event? Not exactly damaged. I would say. Changed. A long still pause. You can't do it anymore. He finally said very, very quietly. Do you understand me, Sophia? Her lips quivered for the barest fraction of a moment. Max, are you trying to fix me? It was impossible, and she couldn't bear for him to realize that too late, walk away. No. I'm trying to save you. An implacable absolute answer. It's about choices. I need you to make one to fight those instincts. Every time you give in, it eats away a little bit of your psyche. The otherness in her, twined with those dark threads that tasted of the net, stirred, considered, bowed its head. I can do that. For Max, only for Max. He was a cop. He'd accepted her past with open eyes and an open heart, but what she did from now on, even if only a few individuals realized the depth of the connection between them, would reflect on him, stain his career, and she was too proud of him to chance that. It's a small price to pay to be with you. No price, Sophie, no ultimatums. An unqualified reassurance that made her want to pull him forward by the lapels of his suit jacket, and kiss him again and again. You belong to me, and I'm keeping you no matter what. That means you belong to me too. It came from the dark heart of her, the place where no light had ever shone. Until this man looked at her with eyes that said she wasn't a piece of trash to be discarded because she'd proved imperfect. For the first time in her life she had started to feel whole, the scars, the fractures, simply a part of her. Max shrugged, that lean dimple flashing in his cheek. I'm not arguing. So, she said, everything in her, even the once scared, lonely girl who'd only ever spoken through the hand of cold justice before, determined to stake its claim loud and clear. If I find a business card from a female in your jacket, she had better be a colleague. Max felt a laugh build in his chest, had to fight the urge to tug Sophia into his arms and bite down on that full lower lip in a gesture of open possession. No one will dare hit on me after I mention my wife is a J with a jealous streak. Wife. Her composure splintered. Max, no matter what, we could never. I told you, Sophie. You're mine. End of story. Chapter 36. In certain types of cases, most cops immediately suspect the father. Nobody thinks of the mother, not at first. Except me. And I wish I didn't. From the private case notes of Detective Max Shannon. Ryan Asquith entered the conference room looking as unruffled as ever, but that, of course, was de rigueur for the sigh. Max didn't say anything for several long seconds after the intern arrived. Taking her cue from him, neither did Sophia. Finally, Ryan glanced at his watch. Am I early, detective? You didn't tell us you'd undergone reconditioning, Max said, instead of answering his question. The young male didn't so much as blink. Everything is in my file. And you didn't think to mention the fact that you killed using TK when we're investigating a murder that may have had a TK component? Ryan's eyes skated away from Max's. I assumed you already knew. The personnel department did a full screen on me when I applied for this position. Interesting thing is, Max murmured, seems the department just does a basic screen for short-term interns. Sophia put her organizer on the table. The detective doesn't understand, Ryan, she said in a quiet, calm tone. Oh. Max raised an eyebrow. Those of us who go through a reconditioning, Sophia answered, aren't considered criminals for any acts committed during the period of fracture, because there is no intent. Ryan nodded, holding Sophia's gaze. Exactly. I knew if I told you of the incident, you would focus on me, leaving the true murderer to go free. But you can see, Sophia said, how this places you in the center of the investigation. Ryan glanced down, then up, saying nothing. Sophia tapped Max's foot at almost the same instant. Getting the hint, he rose to his feet. I'm going to grab a bottle of water from outside while Ryan gets his thoughts in order. Sophia. Thank you, some water would be great. Watching the door close behind her cop, Sophia turned her attention to the boy in front of her. And he was just that, only a boy. A boy who, somewhere deep inside, was terrified of his own abilities. Tell me what you were hesitating to say in front of Detective Shannon. Will you keep it confidential? Right then, Sophia saw something in Ryan's eyes that she'd never expected. As long as it doesn't affect Counselor Duncan's safety, it won't go beyond these walls. At the time of Edward Chan's murder, I'd locked myself in one of the meeting rooms that almost no one uses because I needed to meditate. Do you continue to have trouble with your silence? Yes. It was a confession that could have this boy sent back to the center, which made Sophia more inclined to believe him. Why did you tell me? Dark gray eyes locked with her own. You're AJ. I thought if anyone would understand the pressure, you would. Sophia wondered if she was being played very skillfully. Which meeting room? Ryan gave her the details without hesitation. And I'm not strong enough to teleport, he said, confirming what they'd already determined. That's never been in my skill set. Thank you. Ryan opened his mouth, paused, then said, Nobody really pays attention to an intern. What have you heard? There are rumors in the city that Nikita is as flawed as her daughter. Ryan's tone dropped. I thought at first that it was just uninformed talk, but the whispers are gathering in momentum. And that kind of thing doesn't happen without someone feeding the fire. Do you have any idea of who it could be? Not Marcia, Ryan responded. She has no genetic offspring. I believe she has given all her loyalty to the counselor. I can't narrow it any further. The door opened then and Max walked in. Sophia said, Keep your ears and eyes open, Ryan. Let me know if you hear anything. I will. Rising, he glanced at Max, his expression opaque, his dress faultless, the perfect sigh. On the surface, do you have any further questions for me, detective? He left as soon as Max shook his head. I believe him, Sophia said after filling Max in. I think he applied to work for Nikita because of Sasha. Max tipped back his chair. Explain. It's obvious his reconditioning didn't work as well as everyone believes. Reaching out almost automatically, she pushed his chair back on all 4 feet. I think he's hoping that since Nikita has a daughter who feels emotion, she'll go easier on him if the truth comes out. Nikita's got a heart of fucking stone and I'm being cruel to the stone there. Sophia had heard whispers of how Nikita had ascended to the council. Her sheer cold-blooded nature couldn't be doubted. Yes. I hear a but. She allowed her daughter to grow to adulthood, when it would have been far easier for Sasha to have had a fatal accident in childhood. Sophia said, knowing he understood what she didn't say, the parallel she'd drawn. And in the end, the reality matters less than the perception. Ryan wants to find someone who'll be on his side. I get why he'd latch on to her, Max said. But if Nikita's the best he can do, the kid's in serious trouble. He tapped the 2 printouts he just put on the table. We take Ryan and Marcia out. I'm with the kid on her loyalty, plus Sasha confirmed they were together when Chan died. And we're left with Andre Tulane and Quentin Gareth. Tiny lines fanned out from the corners of his eyes. I've got a couple of things I want to check where those 2 are concerned. Including Tulane's mysterious weekly appointments? Max nodded. He's been very careful not to raise any red flags. Could be a case of hiding in plain sight. It would, Max thought, require balls of steel to pull that off in Nikita's territory. If you don't need me, Sophia said, her lips lush and distracting, I want to go back to the apartment and look through the signet. I have a few ideas. He frowned. I don't know much about the signet, but what I do know tells me it'll put a huge amount of pressure on you to be surrounded by so much data, so many minds. My signet shields appear to be adapting to my increasing need, she said, and he heard the threat of confusion in her tone. So that shouldn't be an issue. I don't like it. His protective instincts burned a hot white flame. You'll be alone if something happens. That gave her pause. There is a risk, but... Faith, Max interrupted, recalling the almost protective way the FSI had looked at Sophia. Call her. Ask if she'll spot you while you go diving through the net. She's a cardinal FSI, Sophia said. Her time is worth hundreds of thousands if not millions of dollars. Why should she agree to waste it on me? Max saw that she truly didn't understand. Because Dark River's come to consider me a friend. And the cats understood, even if they didn't exactly approve, that Sophia was his. Plus, you got the message to Nikita when Sasha was threatened. Changelings don't forget things like that. He saw her absorb that, give a small nod. I'll call her. But doesn't the fact that Faith saved our lives cancel out any obligation on their part? It's not obligation. It's about building bonds. Placing his hand on the back of her chair, he met her gaze, the luxuriant softness of her hair brushing his skin. Promise me you'll be careful. I don't want you bleeding out because you've been taking risks. Her expression never changed, but he could see steam coming out her ears. I am not stupid, Detective Shannon. Kindly get that thought into your head. He wanted to kiss her. Caleb walked into Nikita's office to find her just ending a conversation with a tall male of mixed ethnicity, who didn't move like a changeling but a human. Caleb knew who the male was, of course. He'd known all about Max Shannon almost the instant after Nikita requested him. The enforcement detective wasn't only good at his job, he was as tenacious and stubborn as a bloodhound. Counselor Krychek, the detective said with a small nod as he walked out of the room, closing the door behind himself. What do you need with an enforcement agent? He asked Nikita as he took a seat in the chair across from her. We have arrows for a reason. The arrows are Ming's, she said. I needed an impartial party. Caleb thought of the continued attempts to hack his shields, the sense of being very closely observed, and the failed tries to track him through the signet when he didn't want to be tracked. He could have ended the game days ago, turning the tables on his trackers, though given their skill, it would have taken a concentrated amount of time and effort, but he was intrigued enough to let it continue. Because there was one group and one group alone in the net with the covert skills to evade the traps he'd laid to date, and if that group had decided to shift its allegiance. You're hemorrhaging people, he said to Nikita, keeping his other thoughts to himself. The fact that you've noticed puts you at the top of the suspect list. On the contrary, we both know that I do what needs to be done myself. I don't need to rely on others who might make mistakes. Nikita settled back in her chair at his plain speaking. Have you noticed something in Henry's pattern of behavior? Caleb hadn't, and being out of the loop was not something he appreciated. Tell me. I'd rather show you. Turning her chair toward the thin comm screen mounted on one wall, she darkened her windows and brought up a map of the world. The red dots indicate the places where Henry has been in the past 6 months. The blue dots indicate incidents that took place at the same time. There were clusters of blue around every single red dot. Incidents have been increasing, Caleb said. It's not impossible that he could have coincidentally been at the same locations, but I'm assuming the incidents were major enough to have caught your notice. Not the first 5 or so, no, Nikita said. As you say, there have been little outbursts of violence here and there, so I paid them no notice. But these incidents don't involve violence, except of the self-inflicted kind. Suicides. That pricked his interest. Suicide wasn't considered taboo in Psy culture. The majority of those who recognized their mental patterns as aberrant chose to end their existence, rather than face rehabilitation. But the chances of the suicides, 10 or more in each location, lining up so neatly with Henry's travels was exceptionally low. I'm certain he's used the tactic before, Nikita said. Caleb agreed. There'd been a string of violent incidents several months ago, with Psy breaking conditioning in public. All of those Psy appeared to have been programmed to suicide after completing their task, or if caught. His recent behavior does, however, suggest that he's seen the error of that line of thinking. Given the way the Psynet function, violence only spawn more violence. A constant feedback loop. Nikita put down the remote but didn't erase the image. Several of the individuals who suicided were on the rehabilitation watch list. The others could have been fragmenting. So Henry could see it as removing violence from the net. Caleb considered the idea. Can you send me the full data on the suicides? The file was telepathed into his mind an instant later. Nikita checked messages on her organizer as he went through the list. He eliminated an erratic but highly intelligent chemist, Caleb said, 2 medical specialists, and at least 1 trained sharpshooter. And that's at first glance. It continues like that, Nikita told him. He might see it as erasing the weak from the net, but he's also shoving the balance toward mediocrity. Caleb looked at her. Or perhaps Henry hasn't yet given up on the idea of a fully coherent net. Before her defection, council scientist Ashaya Line had been close to developing a neural implant that would have instituted silence at the biological level, creating a true hive mind. She destroyed all the pertinent data when she defected, but that knowledge could have been recreated. He may be pruning those he thinks will prove a challenge to that goal. In that case, I suggest you be careful. Caleb turned away from the screen as she flicked it off. Her windows cleared a moment later. I appreciate the information. We'll have to consider how to proceed with this. But I wanted to speak to you about another matter. Nikita waited in pristine silence. I've discovered some rather interesting facts about Psy. Facts that could turn Nikita's failure into an asset. Nikita put aside her organizer. Really? Chapter 37. You make me feel strong, make me feel as if I can fight fate itself. If you're reading this letter, I failed. But be proud of me, Max. I tried so hard. Sophia Russo in an encrypted and time-coded letter to be sent to Max Shannon after her death. Sophia wasn't used to having anyone but Max in her living space. Faith Nightstar wasn't anywhere near as physically imposing as Max, but she had a presence. Then there was the long-limbed female who'd accompanied her. Sophia, Faith said. This is Desiree. Recognizing Desiree for what she was, a bodyguard, Sophia told her guests to make themselves comfortable in the living area before she walked into the bedroom and took a cross-legged position in the middle of the bed. Surfing the net didn't require much preparation for most people, but the more centered she was, the less chance of an accidental breach. Because even in the net there were individuals with weak or useless shields. Their thoughts leaked out in a constant barrage. The sensitive could easily get caught in the psychic storm. But Sophia had no intention of being thrown up against the rocks. Narrowing her thoughts to a fine point, she took a careful step into the dark skies of the Signet and dropped her highly effective automatic firewalls, wrapping herself in much more mundane ones instead, so she could go where she needed to go without being noticed. There was an element of risk to her choice. If any of her fragmentation, her feelings leaked out, she'd be hunted down in minutes. And once they found her, rehabilitation would follow so fast, she'd have no chance of escape. So I'll be very careful, she muttered, and went to merge into the slipstream of the net. Except her shields reset to the distinctive new formation without warning. And no matter how many times she tried, they wouldn't remain ordinary, unremarkable. I need you to behave, she finally muttered aloud in frustration. I might as well be wearing a target on my back if I go out like this. Her shields turned the exact velvet black of the net, making her effectively invisible. Sophia swallowed on the physical plane. Oh, that'll work. No response, but she had the impression that something was watching, listening. It should have disconcerted her, and it did to an extent. But whatever that something was, it was also protecting her. And she wasn't about to reject it. Not when the otherness in her, the broken girl who'd finally become an integrated part of her after 2 long decades, recognized the pain in that entity, as if it expected to be kicked aside, to be shoved into a corner, to be forgotten. I accept, Sophia thought deep in her mind. Thank you. No response, but her shield seemed to strengthen even further as she slipped into the net. Sleek, dark, impenetrable. The psychic network around her was the biggest data archive in the world, its information highways updated every second of every day by uploads from the millions of minds jacked into its psychic fabric. But as a J in possession of often confidential information, Sophia was trained to be far more careful about what she shared. The majority of the time, the only things she uploaded were the official, court-approved results of her cases. But it wasn't just purposefully uploaded data that filled the net. There were fragments of thought, images, things that had escaped as a result of inadequate or fragmented shielding, conversations that had taken place in the net outside of a mental vault. Things did decay after a period of time, but that period could never be predicted. She'd once caught whispers that had mentioned events of 100 years past. Other comments decayed almost as soon as they were spoken. You could spend an eternity surfing the slipstream. However, as a young intern, Sophia had been taught to search using highly refined filters. She'd worked for a prosecutor one summer, a judge another, tracking down specific pieces of data. Now she used those same skills to search for any mention of pure psi. A significant number of hits. Rumors mostly, as pure psi didn't officially exist. And yet almost everyone in the net knew about them. It was a very effective technique, Sophia was forced to admit. Those in agreement with pure psi's worldview made the effort to find them. On the flip side, those who didn't share that view tended to dismiss the group as nothing but a small fringe element. As she drilled down layer by layer, sorting through massive amounts of data, she began to glimpse the full extent of the group's insidious growth. Pure psi was whispered of in French, Malayalam, Russian, Maori, Tongan, Greek, Swahili, Urdu, and a number of other languages she couldn't immediately identify. Saving as much of the data as she could for future translation, she focused on the pieces she could understand. Good of the race. Pure psi have the right. Outside council control. Backing. Definitely council-backed. I don't see the validity in closing the net. They've been behind the Jax cleanups. That last whisper caught Sophia's interest. Jax was the scourge of the psi. A drug that many said broke conditioning on the most basic level, allowing the user to feel emotion. True or not, it was a cancer no one had been able to excise from the population. But Sophia thought she had noticed a decrease in the number of addicts on the streets of late, and she hadn't seen any at all since coming to San Francisco. Of course, that could be as a result of the heavy changeling presence in the city. Jax users tended to stick to more psi-friendly locations. My family is still discussing the matter. Good of the psi. It'll bring us back into. The changelings and humans are irrelevant. It's only the Signet that matters. That last summed up the tenor of the more clandestine discussions, and of pure Psy. The group was intent on an isolationist policy. It believed the Psy-net had been corrupted by outside influences and was bent on bringing all Psy back into the fold, whether they wanted to come or not. Having managed to get his hands on the NAV file from Andre Toulane's personal vehicle, thanks to some discreet help from the Duncan Corporation's head mechanic, Max was on his way to where the slender black male disappeared every second Tuesday, when his stomach growled. Dropping into a nearby deli, he placed his order, then made a call to Sophia's. "She's fine," Faith answered, her voice consciously quiet. "Catching a nap after the exertion, but otherwise okay." The image of Sophie cradled up in bed made his body fill with a warmth that had nothing to do with sex and everything to do with a harsh, protective tenderness. "Call me if that changes." A slight pause. "Max, she's a J. You understand what that means, don't you?" It was the care in her tone that stopped him from snapping at her. Faith, he thought, probably comprehended more about the pressures that faced a J than almost anyone else outside the Corps. "I know. Doesn't mean I have to accept it. You sound just like Vaughn." Since the changeling had managed to save his mate, Max figured that was a good thing. Hanging up after a quick goodbye, he grabbed his chicken and avocado sub and took a seat at one of the tables. He was in the process of demolishing it when Clay slid into the seat on the other side, his own sub in hand. "I got something for you," the sentinel said, taking a long draw of the energy drink he'd ordered along with the sub. "Yeah. Rumor on the street is that Psy are meeting in little groups all over the place," the sentinel said. "But they're being covert about it. Avoiding Nikita's eyes? Possible. Don't forget, Anthony Kiriakis is also in the general area." "That's right. He's out by Tahoe." And though Faith's father kept a lower profile than Nikita, he controlled a vast network of foreseers, an immeasurable advantage over his enemies. "So what, you were just passing by, saw me? Heard you were around, needed to talk to you and eat lunch." A shrug. "Funny how you hear things." "Yeah, funny." The sentinel's expression didn't change, but Max had the distinct impression the leopard was laughing. Max gave the changeling male a look that promised retaliation. "You have any specific addresses for these covert meetings?" "A few. They tend to move around." Pulling out a folded piece of paper from his jeans, Clay passed it over. "We've been keeping an eye on the situation, but since it's accountants and teachers, we put it low down on the priority list." Glancing at the list, Max noted that none of the locations correlated with Tulane's unexplained trips. "Thanks." Finishing off his lunch, he tucked the slip of paper safely in his jacket. "I'll let you know if anything comes of it." Clay put his empty drink bottle on the table. "How's your J?" His tone said far more than the words. "She can't leave the net." Saying it out loud seemed to make it inescapably more real. "Ever?" "Ah shit. I'm sorry, Max. We would have helped you if she'd wanted to defect." Max hadn't been part of any kind of a family since River disappeared, but he understood what this was, understood the value of Clay's offer. "Her telepathic shields are close to total collapse," he found himself saying, the words torn out of him. "She's 8.85 on the gradient, so when they fail, no place in the inhabited world would be safe for her." His Sophia's amazing violet eyes would go black under an avalanche of noise, and then there would be only silence in his life. Endless. Relentless. Forever. 20 minutes later, Max parked his car a block away from where Andre Tulane disappeared at regular intervals, and strolled down the cheerfully painted suburban street. The houses wore shades of bubblegum blue, candy pink and meringue yellow, almost all with white trim. Human. Very human. The sole reason a Psy might wind up living amongst such brightness would be if there was some city ordinance that stipulated the colors in order to retain the area's historical character. Psy understood the value of architectural tourism. Seeing an old lady tending her winter quiet garden a couple of houses over, he wandered across. "A pretty face doesn't do it for me," she said without pausing in her task. "Never has. Not since Bobby Jones broke my heart in junior high." Max didn't much feel like smiling. Time was slipping by so fucking fast, but he made his lips curve. "I don't suppose you know who lives in number 9? She's never done anything to hurt anyone." A suspicious glance. "So you leave her alone." Max frowned. "Human." Her snort was inelegant, her words acerbic. "You think a Psy would live on this street?" Max made a decision. If it was the wrong one, it could tip off their quarry, but Max had just remembered something else he'd read in Tulane's recent history and realized the answer to this mystery might be both logical and utterly inexplicable. "Thanks for your help." Turning away, he walked to the door of number 9 and knocked. The petite woman who opened the door had arms covered by computronic black carapaces and scars on her face that still bore a hard pink shine, vivid against the naturally mocha color of her skin. Yes. Gut tight with the knowledge that he was right about Tulane's motivation for visiting this house, Max showed her his electronic ID. Miss Amberly Bouvier? It wasn't a guess, not given her physical condition. Yes. What's this about? Could we talk inside? He could feel the gardener glaring at him. A hesitation before she nodded and led him down the corridor and into the kitchen. Is this about Andre? She asked, taking a seat at the table set by the window. When he raised a surprised eyebrow, she continued, I figured someone would come sooner or later, but I thought it'd be another sigh. Max leaned one shoulder against the door jamb. I need to know the reason for Andre Tulane's visits. Penance, Amberly said in stark response. His car blew a fuse and he lost control of it on a rainy night 6 months ago. Unfortunately, I happened to be on the curb when he drove over it. Amberly shook her head, her cropped hair blue-black in the sunlight. I don't understand it myself, so I can't expect you to. Everyone, even I, agreed it was an accident, but he said he was responsible, so he paid all my medical bills, made sure I got the best treatment. Your arms. They'll be back to full strength in another couple of months. She touched her face. And these scars are going to be all but gone after they heal enough to begin laser treatments. Those treatments, Max thought, hadn't been around when Sophia had been a child. He might have asked why she hadn't taken advantage of them as an adult, but he knew the answer. It was a quiet, powerful rebellion. Sophia wanted to remember the past. Remember the 3 children who'd been lost. He was fucking proud of her for finding a way to speak even in silence. Why does Andre still come to see you? To do any work around the house or yard that needs to be done. Amberly sounded bewildered, her eyes huge in that small face. He doesn't speak more than 3 words to me, but by the time he's done, the lawn is mowed, anything broken is fixed, and my car's running smooth as Irish whiskey. Max didn't need to hear any more. Whatever the demons that drove the quiet black man, Andre Tulane was deeply entangled with a human, in direct violation of pure Psy's aim of absolute racial purity. In the pure Psy world, Max thought as he stepped out into the crisp afternoon air, a human cop would never meet, never love, and never lose a violet-eyed J. Chapter 40. Counselor Caleb Krychek was just getting into his car for the drive to his office in Moscow when he felt it. A telepathic ricochet. Catching the returning tracker with a psychic hand, he leaned against the vehicle. He had thousands of these invisible psychic constructs scattered throughout the net, all of them primed to scan through billions upon billions of bytes for data for one name. This was the first one that had returned since he began his search 6 years, 5 months, and 3 weeks ago. He was careful with the old and fragile construct, not wanting to lose what it had brought back to him. It took him almost 10 minutes to penetrate the layers of his own security, and then there it was. That name, linked to information that had passed through a distant part of the net 2 weeks ago. The information was fragmented, the trail would be difficult if not impossible to pick up, but that mattered little at this point. Because at last, he had confirmation that his quarry was alive. Chapter 41. I'm writing this as you sleep beside me, you're breathing easy, the lines of stress smoothed away. And I don't know how to describe what I feel for you. I don't have those words. It hurts, this emotion in my heart, this inexorable ache. Sophia Russo in an encrypted and time-coded letter to be sent to Max Shannon after her death. Sophia lay in bed the next morning, her limbs loose and her body utterly sated. So this was what pleasure felt like, she thought in wonder. This was what poets wrote about and artists painted. This was why humans gave each other secret smiles and changelings murmured in their mates' ears. The bathroom door opened to reveal a tiled enclosure full of steam, just as Morpheus jumped onto the bed and patted around to sit right up against her abdomen. She took the hint, stroking his solid form. You shower in water far too hot for you, she said to the beautifully muscled male who walked out from the heat and headed to where he'd thrown a change of clothes last night, after they'd seen Ryan enter that stately queen and she and Max had decided she should return home, tear apart Ryan's file. Her cop had called up a white blonde changeling male named Dorian to drop her home, while he'd stayed on Ryan until close to 3 a.m., leaving only when his friend Clay had arrived to take the watch for a few hours. She'd heard him return home, heard him confer with the manhunt team for over half an hour. Looks like Bonner's parents provided him with access to a private jet, he'd said to her when he stumbled into bed. Bastard could be anywhere. I've alerted the local airports. Let the cats know. He'd gone straight to sleep after that, but woken an hour ago with more than enough energy to make her gasp. You'll boil, she said, as another wave of steam escaped the bathroom. An unrepentant wink. Heat is good for you. Towel hitched around his lean waist and hair damp, he looked young, incredibly approachable. A rumble against her palm as Morpheus began to purr. I was thinking about calling Quentin Garrett's college. Having discovered nothing incriminating in Asquith's files, she was staying behind today to sort through the Cynet data she'd cached, in the hopes of unearthing something that might tie Pierside directly to the attacks on Nikita's people. But if he has alerts set in place, it could tip him off. Hold off on that, Max said, throwing the towel on the bed. I might be able to get the information another way. The intimacy of watching him dress was a tightness in her chest. Come back to me, Max, she said quietly. How could I resist? A solemn look, a kiss that held emotion that made her soul ache. You're holding my heart hostage. 10 minutes later and far too soon, Max walked to the door, with her behind him. I'll be on the phone to the manhunt team throughout the day too. So leave a message if you can't get through and I'll call back. Reaching out, he tucked a strand of her hair behind her ear. Building security has Bonner's image. They know not to let him up to you under any circumstances. Enforcement's on alert, and Clay's also put the word out among Dark River's network of informants. A squeeze of her hip. If you go out, and I'd rather you didn't, don't forget to take one of the security guys with you. Or better yet, call me, and if I can't get away, I'll call Dark River, organize a leopard escort for you. Remembering the warped arousal she'd read in Bonner during the Gwen Haley scan, Sophia hugged her arms around herself, the tiny hairs on her body rising in primitive warning. I plan to stay in. Being outside in the general population was becoming more and more unbearable, and I won't be entering the Cynet, so don't worry about that either. He touched his lips to her temple. How are you? A rough question that held 1,000 unsaid things. She placed her hand over his heart, soaked in the incredible gift of his presence. Still here. But her telepathic shields were so thin that any touch by an unstable personality could perforate them. A hard kiss. I'll check up on you every hour. Don't even try to stop me. He was gone an instant later. Knowing she should have protested, but reassured by his protectiveness, she fed Morpheus, who graciously permitted her to stroke him once, then took a quick shower. Afterward, refreshed, she changed into a pair of soft velour pants. They were like nothing she'd ever before worn. She'd bought them on impulse several months ago, in a decision so non-sci she hadn't required a medic to tell her she needed to go in for reconditioning. But she hadn't worn them until now. The dark blue material was velvety soft, delicate, and beautiful against her skin. Enjoying the tactile pleasure, she put on a stretchy t-shirt, zipping herself into a hooded gray sweatshirt several sizes too large for her to complete the outfit. It wasn't cold in her apartment, but the sweatshirt was Max's, carried his scent. Her cop, she thought, would never understand the depth of what he meant to her, what he'd given her. It was at once a wild, earthy thing and an incandescent joy. The only shadow came from the knowledge that their time had almost run out, that one day soon, her mind would fill with noise and she'd lose Max, lose the tearing power of the emotion that had made her whole, every broken part of her accepted and cherished. Her fingers clenched. She forced them to open. It was no use being angry, no use railing at fate. Fact was fact. She'd gone through every manual, spoken to every one of her colleagues, all to no avail. Telepathic shields could not be rebuilt once they began to degrade from the core out. They use then discard us like garbage, a fellow J had said to her. Why did you accept the position? As an 8-year-old girl strapped to a hospital bed, Sophia had had no choice, but other JS did. It was the only available job. Sophia had understood. Is it always the only available job when a J attempts to find work? Yes. Fury had made her gut twist. In the past, before silence, she dared ask, knowing the J opposite her would have been a historian if given the choice. Was it like this? No. JS were only ever used in capital cases, or if there was a hung jury where the crime fit certain parameters. The load, Sophia had realized, would have been spread, placing far less pressure on each individual. JS still went mad, still broke, her colleague had continued, but no more than the rest of our race. But now the council used them up in order to consolidate its power. In light of that brutal truth, Sophia wasn't sure she wanted to save Nikita. But Max was a good cop. He believed in justice, made her want to believe in it too. Her mind took that thought, connected it to a rumor tangled up in the information cache she'd begun to process while she got out the ingredients to prepare a breakfast drink of the hot chocolate Max had bought for her. Interesting. Leaving the milk unopened on the counter, she found a piece of paper and, taking a seat on the sofa, began to note down the relevant facts as she smoothed out the lumps of raw data. The click of her door being opened was quiet, but it shattered her concentration. Ma. But it wasn't her cop. Her eyes took in the security override key in the woman's hand, the center badge on her lapel. No. She went to lower her signet shields, send out a psychic mayday, but the woman's male companion was already gripping her arm, slapping a pressure injector against the vulnerable skin of her neck, his naked hand mere centimeters away. Her concentration fractured, and they shot something into her bloodstream that turned her mind dull sluggish. Useful that JS have such solid signet shields, the woman said, supporting Sophia under one arm while her partner took the other. Why is she on the rehabilitation watch list then? Her telepathic shields are all but gone. If she isn't rehabilitated now, there's a chance she'll break on her own. They began to head down the corridor. And the death throes of the fractured are always so disruptive to silence. Sophia tried to resist their hands, the way they directed her like a rag doll, but her mind was mired in thick fog, her body refusing to follow her commands. They walked her down to the garage level, each holding up half her weight. And the only thing she could think was that Max would never know how much she loved the scent of him. Max jogged through the doors of Dark River's Chinatown HQ just as the skies opened up. That's some storm, he said, shaking off the droplets that had managed to hit him. Forecast to clear sometime tonight, Dorian said. So what's up? Clay still shadowing that intern for you? No, he had to switch with a guy named Emmett, who had texted Max a few minutes ago to say that Asquith had arrived at work. That's right. Dorian clicked his fingers. Clay's holding a training session for some of the soldiers today. Max nodded. I hear you're good with computers. What he'd heard was that the blonde sentinel was an expert hacker. Bright blue eyes blazed with an intelligence many people missed, being taken in by looks reminiscent of some teenage surfer. Yeah? Where did you hear that? Max tapped the side of his nose. You have your sources. I have mine. I don't work for free. Dorian folded his arms and stared meaningfully at the box Max had carried inside. There was a very feline look of anticipation on his face. Thanks for driving Sophie home last night. Max handed over the donuts. I was working late anyway. He opened the box, drew in a long breath. What do you need on the computer front? Anything you can dig up about a Psy named Quentin Gareth during a particular period almost 20 years ago. Taking out a notepad, he jotted down the details of the 6-month gap. Dorian took a bite out of a jelly donut. Good call coming to me, he said after swallowing. Psy often forget about the internet. Lots of stuff cached all over the place. Taking the torn-off piece of notepaper, he slid it into a pocket. I'll do the search now. Have a few minutes free before a meeting. Call me on my cell if you have anything. I'm heading to Nikita's. But he'd only gotten to the door when he got a call from the head of the manhunt team. Doctor's been found. Fury and pity intertwined. We were right about the time and method of death. At least he didn't torture her. It was Max knew a small mercy. Was she found near the private airport where you think he boarded a jet? Yeah. Parents are refusing to tell us where the jet might have gone. The filed flight plan says it's heading to Greece, but that's a load of bullshit. Air control hasn't got it on its systems, which means the Bonners were fucking ready with a plane designed to evade radar. Anger burned through Max's veins. I've put a watch on some offshore accounts I know are his. Without a warrant and with the help of friends in the Computronic Crimes branch of enforcement, but if it would help catch the butcher before he killed again, Max wasn't going to sweat the ethics much. He hasn't accessed them yet. His mother's probably supplying him. Bart's working on a warrant for her financials. Sightings. Through the roof. A harsh sound. People jumping at shadows. You know how it is. We'll get him, Max said, able to hear the other cop's frustration. We did it once, we'll do it again. Hanging up after a few more words, he ran out to the car, the rain pelting against his body. Shrugging off his wetsuit jacket, he was driving through Chinatown when he realized he'd forgotten his security keycard, which allowed him full access to the Duncan building, at Sophia's apartment. Figuring it'd be quicker to pick it up than have it reissued, he thrust a hand through rain-damp hair and turned homeward. Sophia? He called out as he wandered into her bedroom. The keycard was on the dresser where he'd put his wallet the night before, but the bedroom proved otherwise empty. Sophie? You in the shower? However, when he knocked, the door swung inward. Worried she'd decided to head out in spite of Bonner's possible presence, he pulled out his cell phone and placed a call to hers. It rang in the living area. Ice crystals formed in his blood. Closing his cell, he began to scan the apartment with the eyes of a cop. The food preparation area was clean except for the unopened container of milk on the counter. He stilled. Sophie was hopelessly neat, but it was possible she'd forgotten to tidy it away while distracted by something. Living area undisturbed. Organizer on the coffee table. And the bedroom when he returned to it. His head snapped back to the organizer. Sophia might forget her cell phone, but she was never without that computronic device. Gut clenching with a fear so visceral he couldn't afford to feel it if he was going to function, he ran out of the apartment and straight to the security hub at the heart of the building. Entering using the override Nikita had programmed into his key, he had the PSI guard rewind the corridor feed. Stop! Who are those two? The guard enlarged the view. The facial recognition software places the female as an MPSI attached to a local branch of the center, while the male appears to be a security expert. Max shoved down his raging worry, focusing only on the lethal clarity of his anger. Why were they allowed up? He asked, his tone a whip. I fucking warned you all that she could be a target. The guard was already accessing the security log. According to this, they had an authorization which overrode our. Bring it up, he interrupted. The authorization. It was a snapped command when the man didn't immediately understand. The screen filled with a crisp document mandating the removal of Sophia Russo designation J to the Berkeley branch of the Center for Comprehensive Rehabilitation. Rage burned an inferno across Max's skin, but his mind remained mired in ice. What does that mean? He pointed to what appeared to be a coat of arms or an emblem of some kind on the bottom of the page. A small square of black overlaid with a web. The security guard went unnaturally still. That's Counselor Henry Scott's new emblem. Max was already coding in a call to Nikita as he ordered the guard to send the location of the center to his phone. Nikita, Henry Scott is having Sophia rehabilitated, he said the instant Nikita answered, knowing Henry's interference would ensure Nikita's cooperation. Counselors, he'd learned, were as territorial as changelings. She was taken an hour ago. Nikita didn't ask useless questions. Which branch? Berkeley. Wait. He was in the car and screaming out into the rain-dark city by the time her voice came back on the line. They haven't yet reached the center. A pause. They should have according to the time frame you've given me. He forced himself to think, to focus. The rain hadn't turned torrential until about 20 minutes ago. Nikita was right, they should have reached the center by now. And then suddenly, he realized that Nikita should have been able to contact Sophie on the net. Everything stopped as he forced himself to ask, is she still alive? Chapter 42. Her mind is present in the Cynet, Nikita said. But she's not responding to telepathic hails. Relief mixed with a cold anger. If the bastards had hurt her. I need you to find out the make and model of the car the center people were driving so I can ask enforcement to put out an alert. You'll have the information in minutes. I've already notified the center not to proceed with the rehabilitation order. Thanking her, he hung up. But he knew Nikita's intervention wouldn't help, not if Sophia had been taken somewhere else. They could have already. No, hold on, Sophie. You just hold on. Opening his cell phone, he made another call. Clay, I need your help. The changeling male turned out to be at an indoor training facility at least 20 minutes closer to the center than Max. I've got several soldiers with me, Clay said, able to hear the incredible strain in Max's voice. But he knew from experience that the other man wouldn't appreciate sympathy, only practical assistance. We'll head out now. Hanging up, he pulled a team together, and they drove out into the pounding rain. Pretty isolated, Kit said when they reached the road that led to the center, his auburn hair appearing deep brown in the stormy light. Visibility's low, and getting lower as thunderclouds continued to roll in, their heavy weight making it seem as if it was late afternoon when it wasn't yet mid-morning. This is the only way to the place. The Psy had located their new lobotomy facility in an innocuous building set on a patch of fenced land that Dark River had kept an eye on, but hadn't considered a threat, because it had no obvious military or tactical function. If they're not on this route. Stop! Kit's cry came at almost the same instant that Clay pulled the car to a halt, reacting even before the proximity sensors detected the overturned vehicle on the road. Getting out, Clay held up a hand to the packmates following in the vehicle behind them and ran to the wreck. I have a male on this side, injured. Fuck, it looks like his throat's been slashed. Same here, except it's a female. Wiping the rain from his face, Kit looked at him over the top of the car as Clay rose. She had an ID around her neck, with an M in the corner. Rain pelted Clay's back in hard little bullets. I'll call Max. Get him to send us the images. Max's car screeched to a halt behind the second Dark River vehicle at that instant. Man, Kit whistled, his lashes dripping rain. The cop must have driven at 3 times the speed limit. I didn't even know cars would let you do that. She's not in here, Clay called out as soon as Max exited his vehicle, knowing from the white look on the cop's face that that was what he feared. Max peered into the overturned car as if to confirm Clay's words. A second later, he bent, bracing his hands on his knees, his white shirt so wet as to be almost transparent. Thank God. Shoving a hand through Rain's slick hair, he rose to his full height. Sophie looked like she'd been drugged. If she got out, wandered off. Jamie Nico Detsy, Clay said, pointing to the packmates who'd exited the second vehicle when Max came running over. Do a sweep, see if you can find any trace of Max's J. The heavy canopy of trees around them could have protected the scent trail from the rain. Kit, you too. Max, Desiree said, her tone gentle. Do you have anything of Sophia's? Max blinked rain from his eyes. I had a shower before I left home, he said, obviously aware that intimate contact could leave a detectable scent. Just kissed her goodbye. The fucking rains probably washed away anything that was left. Frowning, Desiree stepped closer, her long thin braids sleek ebony in the wet. Do you mind? At Max's distracted nod, she unbuttoned the top 3 buttons of his sodden shirt and pressed her nose to his skin, taking a deep breath. To his credit, Max didn't move. Got it. A fierce grin. She's in your skin, cop. Jamie, Nico, and Kit repeated the process, the men choosing to take the scent off Max's arm now that Desiree had confirmed it was in his skin, before they scattered. Max glanced at Clay, his gaze piercing even through the rain-lashed darkness. Throats cut, what looks like oil across the surface of the road. This wasn't a simple crash. His words were practical, outwardly calm. Clay understood. First the cop would find his mate. Only then would he give in to the demons tearing him apart. With that in mind, he followed Max's line of thought, his eyes on the oil. You know anyone else who might want your J? Rage turned Max's blood to fire. Bonner, the butcher of Park Avenue. Forcefully wiping away the red haze that would just get in his way, Max moved around the car, checking for anything that might give him a clue as to where Bonner may have taken her. The only good thing is, if the bastard does have her, he won't kill her. No, unlike with the doctor, Bonner would play with Sophia in the cruelest of ways. His hand fisted. The car crash, Clay pointed out, raising his voice to be heard above the rain pounding on the wreck, could have gone very wrong. No, Max shook his head. It was planned very well. Look at where we are, right after a curve, so their speed would have been low. The car had to be on wheels for this to work, Clay said. And they were. Doesn't make sense with the rain. Realizing the sentinel was right, Max examined the side of the vehicle, focusing on the section that he knew controlled the hover system. Does that look like a bullet hole to you? He pointed to a distinctive hole in the plasmetal. Here's another one, Clay said from the other side. He must have tailed them from the apartment, overtaken them at some stage to set up the oil slick, Max said, well aware of the butcher's intelligence. He would have checked his vehicle's NAV system, discovered this road had no turnoffs, no side streets. All he had to do then was lie in wait and shoot. Squatting, he stared through the broken wreckage of the car. The straps in the back have been cut through, but it's obvious Sophia was strapped in far more securely than either of these two. And if he was stalking her, Bonner would have seen them strap her in. Clay's eyes were leopard bright in the rain dark. Acceptable fucking risk. For him, yes. Rising, Max began to consider and discard options, refusing to let Clay's anger feed his own. Not yet. He had to think, had to find Sophie. Bastard's got money. His family's helping him stay on the run. He won't be out in the open or even in a cheap motel, but he'll be close. Clay walked around to stand beside Max. It would make more sense to take her as far as possible, give himself room to breathe. He's impatient. Max swallowed his fury for the 1000th time, told himself he could scream at the heavens later. He'll want to have her to himself as soon as possible. And if the butcher touched her, the viciousness of him might just shatter her mind. Forever. No. Teeth gritted, Max hunkered down, blocking the rain with his body as he examined the vehicle again. Bonner had apparently had no problem with the front seat passengers. Either one or both had been unconscious at the time. There were absolutely no signs of a struggle. He moved to crouch beside the window that Sophie had been dragged through. That was when he saw something glint in the headlights of Clay's car, right below the window itself, where Bonner might have braced his foot to gain leverage. He bent down until his nose almost touched the earth, using the built-in light of his cell phone to illuminate the area. Tiny particles that glittered and glimmered, having been hidden from the rain by the angle of the wreck. Sand. But there was something strange about it. Picking it up in between his fingertips, he brought it even closer to the light. Sparkles of yellow and crystalline red, along with the odd flicker of what looked almost like blue. Clay. Max's eyes fell on a tiny white shell just as the leopard ran over. What V you got? The sentinel asked. Max showed him what he'd found. The sand's not natural. I don't think we're talking a beach house. Wait. Clay took the tiny shell, brought it up to keen changeling eyes. I think this is coated with something. Protective plas would be my guess. You know of any place nearby that might use this stuff? It'll offer enough isolation that Bonner will feel comfortable, but won't be too rugged. That wasn't the butcher's style. Clay's eyes narrowed. Kit and the boys were laughing about some kind of a fake beach resort about an hour from here. He pulled out his cell. I've still got the web address saved. There, says it has bungalows set discreetly apart. Laundry and room service. All the comforts of home for a killer who liked to work without lowering his personal standards. Fit. Max rose to his feet, trying not to think about what Bonner might be doing to Sophia. If he did, he'd shatter, and Sophia needed him to hold it together. Send the location to my phone. He was already running to his car. I'll hook it into the NAV system. Done, the cat called out after him. We'll continue the search here just in case. He was 5 minutes into the drive, too fucking slow when his phone beeped. It was Nikita wanting an update. Counselor, Max said, telling her where he was heading. How many teleporters do you know? He didn't expect help, not now that it was a human sociopath who'd taken Sophia, rather than another counselor's interference. But she said, I'll see what I can arrange. Sweat trickled down Max's spine. I'm coming, baby. Just hold on. Sophia's stomach roiled, nausea filling her mouth. Drugs, she thought. She'd been drugged. The psy-brain didn't react well to narcotics. A moan whispered out of her as she was jostled about, her already battered body unable to stop its jerky movements. Sorry. A smooth, charming voice with excitement. Yes, it was excitement that bubbled beneath the surface. We're almost there. This road's the private one to my bungalow. Made to look like a natural pebbled road. They should have sealed it. At least the rain stopped. Sophia only understood about half of what he'd said. But she knew he'd taken her, and that he wasn't a man she wanted to be alone with. He smelled wrong. A laugh, almost amused. I'll shower when we get to the bungalow. Got a little sweaty and bloody, saving your life. A snapshot of memory, her legs kicking out in futile panic, her limbs too heavy to do much damage as he cut away the straps that held her in the car, as he pulled her out. Rain on her face. Glass on her legs. Reaching down, she touched her thighs, touched the damp material that covered it. You're not injured, the man with the wrongness in him said as he brought the vehicle to a stop. A few cuts and bruises from the crash, but otherwise fine. Not even that wet. My arms got nicely sliced up coming to your rescue. I'm sure you're dying to thank me. A buzzing in her head, a dizzying splash of words and images, her mind twisting out of control for a frightening instant as the drugs punched at her again. But she came to enough to flinch when the man exited his side of the car and came around to hers. I'm not going to hurt you. Lying, she thought he was lying. Don't touch me, she forced out through lips that didn't work right. His expression changed, becoming mean in a way she couldn't describe. I'm in charge now. His hand clamped over her upper arm, and he lowered his head as if he would kiss her. Even in the depths of her narcotic-induced state, she knew that if she told him the truth, it'd give him another weapon with which to torture her. But if she didn't, he might inadvertently break her mind, kill her by making her relive the horrifying ugliness of his blood-drenched memories. And she had to survive, because Max didn't know. No, she whispered, swallowing the nausea inspired by his mere presence. Can't. Contact. He stilled, his hand tightening on her arm. You telling me direct physical contact can hurt you? Is that why you were always wearing those gloves? She tried to nod, but her head fell forward, and she had so much trouble bringing it back up. Yes. Then I guess I'll just have to be careful. Unsnapping her safety belt, he lifted her out of the car and into his arms. Her clothing protected her, but this close, her remaining telepathic shield shredded by the drugs, she couldn't help but drown in the fetid evil of him. He appeared normal, human. But he wasn't. He was so twisted up inside, so viciously mutated that he wasn't even close to human. A slam, her body being laid down on some sort of a soft surface, that handsome blue-eyed face going in and out of focus. Her stomach revolted at the same moment, and she pitched over the side of what turned out to be a sofa, her stomach twisting in agony. There. He was wiping her face with a wet cloth, his voice solicitous. I'll clean that up. Let me take you into the bedroom. A smile that made her blood chill. That's where we'll be playing our games.